We got breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. Superstar wide receiver Davante Adams has officially requested out of Las Vegas. You know, this situation is not surprising because the Raiders organization, let's just be honest about this, they failed Davante Adams. When he wanted out of Green Bay, he wanted to play for the Raiders because he wanted to play with Derek Carr, who was the same quarterback that he spent his college days with at Fresno State, and he had a really great relationship with Derek Carr. So when they kicked Derek Carr to the curb, they said that he wasn't good enough, and they replaced him with Jimmy Garoppolo, and then eventually Aiden O'Connell, and now Gardner Minshew. That made Davante Adams frustrated because it's like, all right, I came here to play with my best friend, Derek Carr. He's no longer here. You're giving me these garbage quarterbacks that you're replacing him with. How do you expect me to be satisfied playing with mediocre quarterback play when all I've known for the majority of my career is playing with greatness? I played the majority of my playing years with prime Aaron Rodgers, the bad man. And then I go from playing with him, an all-time great, to playing with Derek Carr, which I had no problem with. He's no Aaron Rodgers, but I got a good relationship with him. He's one of my best friends, and I love Derek Carr as a person. So I enjoyed my first season playing for this organization just for them to ruin it by getting rid of Derek Carr, and now you got to force me to be satisfied with below average quarterback play. If you watch the Netflix docuseries Receiver that followed Davante Adams and the rest of that cast throughout last season, he was the most unhappiest receiver on that show. He was constantly frustrated with the hospital balls that Aiden O'Connell was throwing to him. He straight up said that I've never been hit this many times in my career, ever. That shows you his frustrations that he had with the current quarterback situation that the Raiders gave him to deal with. And it was already known that going into the offseason, the Raiders' number one priority was to address the quarterback position, and they were unable to get the guy that they truly wanted, that being Jaden Daniels. He went second overall to the Commanders. Then they wanted Michael Penix. Of course, he got snapped up by the Atlanta Falcons. So you were stuck to just go with the best player available and just make do with the two quarterbacks you currently have, and Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And with how the quarterback play has been for the Raiders so far this season, it's no surprise why Davante Adams wants out. He wants to win. This is not a young player in his early 20s. This is somebody who's in the tail end of his career that's getting ready to hang it up, and he wants to go out on top. And the Raiders are not giving him the opportunity to do so. They are not serious about winning football games down there in Vegas with the fact that they have Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as their two best options at quarterback. I would be upset too. I would be wanting to get out too. Now, of course, Davante Adams, he didn't play last week, which is understandable. He had a shoulder injury, even though he looked pretty healthy to me. And before last week, after that embarrassing loss the Raiders suffered to the Panthers, Antonio Pierce in his post-game press conference said that there were guys during that game that made business decisions, and the Raiders were going to be forced to have to make business decisions of their own. And I guess this situation is that business decision that Antonio Pierce was alluding to a few weeks ago. You obviously may not be able to get a first-round pick for Davante Adams, but you definitely can get a second-rounder and maybe a couple of other draft picks, maybe a second package with the fourth or fifth rounder would do the job. You're not going to get a first-rounder for Davante just because of his age, his contract, and the fact that you're trying to trade him in the middle of the season. So the most you're going to get for him, and what reports are saying, is that a second-round pick would do the job. For the Raiders, this was a really disappointing situation that you put Davante Adams in. This dude wanted to come back to an area that he was familiar with. He wanted to play with his best friend, and instead, you just made it a complete nightmare for him. You giving him these randos at quarterback. You make these changes with the head coach. You know, he came to play for Josh McDaniels. It didn't work out, and he ends up having to play for Antonio Pierce. This was not the situation that Davante Adams was expecting when he got traded to this franchise. And the fact that he's requesting a trade coming from somebody that's been pretty unproblematic for the entirety of his career. He never really gets into anything off the field. He's not a locker room distraction. He's a high character guy. With him wanting out, it shows how dysfunctional the Raiders front office is. They were unable to appease him. They couldn't do right by him. And we've been going through this Davante Adams trade saga for over the last 2 years. Last year, we thought he was going to get traded. He had a little interview that he did with a magazine that kind of threw a lot of people off. Deshaun Jackson came out and said that, Davante Adams was unsatisfied with his situation. And Davante came at him a little bit one-sided, saying how, he was just talking out of the side of his mouth, just making up things. Well, it looks like Deshaun Jackson was right. So where's the apology, Davante Adams? For all of the Raiders fans that were in denial about how unsatisfied Davante Adams has been these last couple of weeks, there's an old saying that goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. You just don't have these random trade rumors coming out if there isn't a little bit of truth to the situation. And now we finally got the truth revealed to us that for these last 2 seasons, ever since they got rid of Derek Carr, Davante was never truly satisfied with this situation. And I knew that Davante Adams probably was going to end up getting traded when he made a comment on Shannon Sharp's podcast joking about getting Tom Brady. Despite how old he is, he can still sling that rock. Like, behind every joke, there's a little bit of truth to it. And Davante Adams, if you have listened or consumed any media when he's been giving interviews and whatnot, he's been throwing some tidbits about how he's unsatisfied with the current situation in Las Vegas. It's not surprising that Davante Adams wants out, and this is a sign to how dysfunctional the Raiders franchise is and how they've been over the last 2 decades.